know. So Rob, you were my very first guest 9 weeks ago, and 9 weeks ago, you didn't get an introduction. But since then, all my guests have had a musical introduction, so you're going to get one now. And I think this is very apt. Ready? I need somebody help. Somebody help. We need you, Rob.
I love it.
Before, has the wedding industry needed as much help from lawyers as we do now? But thankfully, there are great lawyers out there to help us navigate this terrible pandemic. And I'm delighted to welcome back the best of the best, the wedding industry lawyer, Mr. Robert Schenk.
Hello. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction.
You're welcome.
What's better than that? Wow.
I felt bad that, the first one, it was, we were figuring it out. We didn't even get to record it. And I'm like, this time you're getting the works.
Oh, I appreciate that. No, I had a great time last time. It's cool because I think that might have been my first Instagram live that I've ever done. So we're all learning together.
It was great. We were totally in this together, and now here we are. Robert, we're 9 weeks in, and it's been tough for everybody with this pandemic and contracts and, just trying to figure it out and navigate it, because nothing is the same. Every venue is different. Every client is different. And the force majeure isn't as black and white as it seems.
Correct. So yes, every day we're running into a new situation. Maybe you've got one set of clients that are wanting one thing, they're great. You got one set of clients that are demon clients that aren't being reasonable. You've got maybe your contract over here has a force majeure provision, maybe one doesn't. Who knows? So we're in uncharted territory from a legal standpoint, and we're uncharted territories from a business standpoint. How do you maneuver? Not just through the law stuff, but through the business stuff too. It's a difficult time for everybody.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess, how do we go from here?
Okay. So force majeure, I know everybody knows what it means, but let's just do the black and white version of what force majeure really means. And then we'll get into situations and, but I just want to say that all the venues that I've been dealing with have been really fantastic. And so my experience from venues has been really amazing. Now, that's not happening everywhere. And my clients have been lovely. It's been figuring out, but we got there. But, so yeah, just explain to everybody that doesn't force majeure, black and white, if there is a black and white.
Sure. So a force majeure is a name of a particular type of contract clause. We're dealing with contracts, okay?
Yeah.
It's a particular contract clause, and not all contracts will have a force majeure provision. But essentially, how it works is it's going to prevent the parties from suing one another for breach of contract if that contract can't be fulfilled due to some type of unforeseen circumstance that is beyond the control of the parties. Every force majeure clause is written differently. Okay, there's not one way that's going to appear in everybody's contracts, and so I can't give specific advice for your particular situation, you being the listener out there.
People, yeah.
Exactly. So because everybody's differently, but typically the concept is that you're not going to force the other party to show up where it's impossible to do so, like if the venue has burned down, or if a tornado has taken it away, or if a pandemic situation has occurred such that there are laws preventing people from getting together. Typically, that's going to be a triggering mechanism that will trigger the force majeure event. So what does that mean? If a pandemic has occurred, the laws of the location of the event are saying that you cannot have this wedding, or the sheriff is going to show up, or the Department of Health is going to show up and arrest all of you, making it practically impossible to go forward with it. And now it's triggered, your duties are now discharged under the contract. Okay, what does that mean? It means that the client can't force you to show up and get arrested, and vice versa. You can't make that client show up and go forward with the wedding in which they would be arrested. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, every force majeure clause is different, meaning what happens to the money? What are the people's obligations with regard to rescheduling? And it's different. Many force majeure clauses, ones that I recommend and I've been drafting for a decade, basically obligate the clients to make reasonable efforts to reschedule the event and fulfill the obligations under the contract at some time when there is no longer the force majeure event. And hopefully people out there listening have that in their contract, which means that it makes it a legal obligation in the contract that even though there's a force majeure event, the contract's not canceled. We keep going forward with the contract obligations until such time as the force majeure event is no longer around. If your contract has that wording in it, then that's your legal position.
Yeah. Let's
reschedule. Let's 2021 or later in 2020, whatever the case may be. That's how you go. What happens if you don't have that in your force majeure provision? What happens to the money? What's the obligations in terms of having to reschedule?
Yeah.
There's no bright line rule. If it just says you are discharged from performing if there's a force majeure event, and there is in fact a force majeure event, then it's possible that all bets are off for you. And in that situation, there are going to be, and again, it'll be jurisdictional, it'll be based on contract wording, but in some instances, the money goes back. In some instances, money goes back minus expenses. And in some, maybe the money doesn't go back at all. It's going to depend on the wording of the contract. But I've been saying for weeks now that if your contract is silent to all these things, then you will likely have a difficult argument to make that you get to keep money, all of the money that you have, or all the contract value that you have, even though you're not going forward with the event. I think a judge is going to say that's unfair to the client. And the client, I think it's going to be unfair to say that they're not allowed, or they want a full return of 100% of the money. A judge might say that's unfair. So there's no bright line rule. And I think to go back to, and I'm hogging the mic, but to go back to
that's good.
to go back to our first episode, it was all about love. It was all about what can we do?
Be kind, be fair.
Yeah, be humans to each other and be like, okay, look, this is what I can do. This is the best that I can do. If not, you got to sue me. And that's what I think that's what we're still at is how much love can you give to the other person and how much can you give to keep it going forward.
And that's, in some cases that's happening, which is great. In other cases that I've had, questions from people today, that's not people. It's almost like in the 9 weeks, they started off, be kind, be fair. And then as the weeks have gone on, they've kind of lost that. And and so now we've got things like locations, holding on to deposits. So there's a question from one of our listeners today of a wedding location that are canceled due to the virus. But they're saying that the wedding that was canceled, the deposit is forfeited, meaning the venue canceled, the venue keeps the deposit. Now, I think is unfair. And then they brought up the case of the deposit versus retainer, and I'd like to come back to that as well, because that's another whole thing that's been going on, deposit versus retainer. But since the event was canceled and the deposit was kept by the venue is now allowing them to book for 2021, but they're keeping the deposit, and now they're asking that couple to pay a much higher deposit to have their wedding at that location. So now not only they lost money, they need to pay money and pay more for 2021.
They got to pay more money.
Is this fair or is this legal?
Is it fair? It's not fair.
It's not fair
legal?
At all.
It's not fair. I would say it's not moral, but and then whether or not it's legal will depend on the wording of that contract. But I'm almost be willing to bet you 100% that the contract is silent to all of it, and the venue is just saying this stuff, because only the best contract in the world could have foreseen this, and the best contract in the world is going to say, if there's a force majeure clause, pandemic in which it triggers the government to shut down events is an event that triggers a force majeure. The clients will work to reschedule. If they don't want to reschedule within a certain time frame, then the client assumes the risk of the force majeure, and the vendor keeps the money. That would be the best setup that you could possibly have.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of a contract, I'm willing to bet you my shirt that that's not what that says. So what that venue is doing is saying, okay, look, we're calling the shots here. This is our offer. And then what that does is it shoves all their chips all in for the client to be like, okay, well, I'll agree to that or not agree to that, but there's not much I can do because you have all my money.
Yeah.
Right? So it puts them in a bad place. So is it possible that that's not legal? Probably. They could probably lose a lawsuit in that. I can't guarantee anything,
No,
but it's probable. It's probable. Right.
Right.
So, but still, at the end of the day, it's probably going to be not advantageous for any client or any vendor to sue each other for these matters.
No.
Because the amount of controversy will be lower than it costs to take it forward.
We don't want to do that. I don't know the location, so I don't know the specifics, but I just think it's very immoral to do that. And then let's hop back to the deposit versus retainer situation, because it seems to me when I was just reading the question that they're using the word, it's a deposit, meaning
right.
So what's the difference? People have that in their contract.
That's a fantastic question. And actually, not to plug another program, but on my podcast, I have an entire episode dedicated to this exact question.
Great. I did actually plug your podcast at the beginning, and
I was watching.
So I'm going to do it at the end as well, so that you can get lots of subscribers. But yes, you have this whole podcast on this.
Right, but so that they don't have to listen to it, the simple answer is there's probably not going to be a state where there's any difference in most wedding industry professions where the word retainer will mean something different than the word deposit, except a venue. And I'll get to that in a second. Right. Just because the word retainer or the word deposit appears in a contract typically doesn't mean anything in the wedding industry. The word retainer and word deposit are terms of art a lot of times in different areas. Like in real estate law or landlord-tenant law, the word deposit is a term of art, meaning that when it appears on a piece of paper, there's a certain definition and a certain meaning that is ascribed to it by virtue of it being on that document and it being a real estate document. The word retainer in most states is a term of art with regard to attorney contracts. Like when you hire an attorney, we are governed by a different set of rules than other industries, and we have ascribed meaning to the word retainer. So there are instances in which those words do matter. I have yet to see case law that says that it matters what happens if there's a retainer or deposit. What really matters is what comes after that. If you want to keep the money or not keep the money, under what circumstances, how that is defined is more important than the use of the word retainer or the use of the word deposit. Now, with regard to a venue, many times there is a difference between the money that is paid that's non-refundable to reserve the date or to keep that venue during the course of the contract, that doesn't go back if the client cancels for reasons under their own control.
Right.
Okay. There's a difference between that money and the money that is paid for security in case things are damaged, like a security
deposit. Yeah.
So it's possible that whatever jurisdiction this venue is in, or whatever the case may be, that while that first set of money might not go back to the client, or could go back to the client, or not, I'm sorry, the venue could keep it. It's likely that if the money is retained because it's there in case somebody damages something, by operation of law, that would have to go back because the event's not taking place. The purpose of that money wasn't to protect the contract value or the expectation of the vendor. It was to protect the stuff.
So the security deposit should go back.
Exactly. So that is an instance in which you could have a foreseeable difference between deposit and retainer. But again, the most important aspect of any of the language that goes in that contract is what comes after those words. And I typically, I don't use either of those words in my contract, and as
No.
you know.
Yes, you did my
Um,
contract, and I have neither of those. Yeah.
right. So